This is a first in a series of videos to teach you how to do passage analysis. Today we're going to talk about how to incorporate direct support in your blogs and then eventually into your essays. First, we need to define our terms. When we're talking about direct support, we're talking about anything that you take from the text. So one type of material might be narrated. The speaker or the narrator is talking, and in the text itself, there are no quotation marks around what it is that you're seeing. Another type of direct support, one that you're probably thinking of when you think of direct support, is quoted dialogue. In this case, it's actually quoted in the original source with quotation marks, sometimes double, sometimes triple. There can be a lot of variety here, but it's actually quoted in the text. So the first thing you do when you're quoting material is to put the double quotation marks around whatever it is that you copy from the book. And even down here, we're still going to put double around it because I'm taking it from the book. That's what it means. Then, if there are any quotation marks in the book, you're going to reverse them. So instead of having double here, I'm going to have a single. Instead of having a double here, I'm going to have a single. So what it looks like is a double and a single. And it means I'm quoting this material, and in the text, the author quoted it. Another convention for direct support when you're quoting from poetry is to use a virgule, and that's this slanted line. And notice this is how it would look in the original text. So there's actually a space on both sides of the virgule. Okay, right there, right there. Okay, and we're only going to be allowed to use 2 virgules, because if you have a quotation that's longer than that, that's longer than 3 lines, even if it's a partial line, such as this right here, this is only half of a line. If you're quoting more than 3, you use long quote formation. And we're not going to teach that to you this year. We don't want you to do that. You want to get the part of the quotation or passage that's most important. You don't need a lot of the extra things. So this is what it's going to look like. The other convention that we're going to use here is in the citation. Now, because we have a translator, we're going to use the translator's name rather than the author's name, Homer, because it's Fagel's words that we're going to be analyzing. Then there's a space right here, and then it's the book number, period, line number, or lines, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Notice there's no extra space, there's no comma after Fagel's, and if this is the end of my sentence, I'm putting a period at the end. Okay? If you want a number of lines, a span of lines, you do it right like that. So 12 to 14. So that would be Fagel's Book 1, lines 12 to 14. All right, so now that you have an understanding of what direct support means and how to cite the quotation and how to write it out with the virgules, let's talk about context. In literary terms, context is the interrelated facts, the conditions, the circumstances that surround a situation or event. So you may have heard of this with journalism, for example, to say, oh, I was quoted out of context. I may have said those words, but the other situation and the other words around it give it a different meaning. And you're not quoting all of what I said, and you're quoting me out of context, making it sound worse than it is. So let's look at an example. She slapped him. Without any context, we don't know what's going on here. Let's look at a few possibilities. Okay, if we see a little bit more of the context, and we can look at her face, perhaps, and he's done something wrong, and she's very angry, and she's slapping him. Maybe she was insulted, or and we can make up whatever we want for this situation. But the context, the picture, the facial expression, the fact that it's a cartoon, the emphasis on the sound effect of the slap, all of that is part of the context. It's the situation surrounding the actual slap. Okay, here's a different context. The setting is different. Okay, the style is different. The expression on his face is different. Perhaps this is a woman who's been accosted at the beach, and this is a stranger, and the woman is slapping him. Okay, we don't know, but that could be a possible context that would give a different interpretation to the slap. It's self-defense rather than an expression of anger. Okay, here's another one that may be similar. Maybe we're thinking she's angry and she's slapping him. But if you know the context, it has a very different meaning. This is actually a picture from an article about how to do a fake slap for theatrical purposes. So that's a different situation. And finally, you have to be careful with pronouns. We never said the she was a person. Here the lioness is slapping the lion, perhaps to defend her cub, or we don't really know why. But that situation, obviously, the context, the circumstances around the slap can have very significant impact on what it means. So we have to explain that when we're setting up a quotation in our papers. We're going to focus on 4 aspects or elements of context. And the first one is the speaker of the lines, the speaker of the passage. Now, if you have the narrator or the speaker of the poem revealing the lines, you don't need to identify that in the context that you actually write into your paper. All right? It's obvious. Everybody knows it's the narrator. And remember, for poetry, we actually use the word speaker to identify that. Speaker is not the same as Homer. Homer is a writer, and we don't want to mix those two things up. The author is different from the voice in which a literary work is written. Sometimes it's the same when you're writing particularly autobiographical poetry, but we don't want to assume that it is. The next element is the audience. To whom are the words addressed? And if it's the reader, you don't need to identify that. The speaker's talking to the reader. There's no point in that. It's redundant, it's obvious, it's not there. But if it's speaking to another character or characters, a group of people, you want to identify that audience. You also want to identify the subject of the passage that you're using. Now, the Mona Lisa happens to be one of the most referred to subjects in the universe, which is why the picture is there. But what's the topic being discussed? What's the topic being presented, described? Whatever's happening in your passage, what's the subject? And then finally, the situation, which is kind of what we think of as the context in the big picture. So what's happened that's going to cause a response, or what is about to happen. So the situation here for this cliffhanger, what's going on. But audience, speaker, subject are all also part of context. So let's look at how that works when you're talking about quotations. This is the first step. So we have a passage, and it's quoting someone who is speaking. So again, we have the double singles. That lets us know. We have the proper citation down here. Okay. So the first step before I write about it is to identify the 4 elements. The speaker is Antinous. The audience is Telemachus. The subject is Penelope's scheme that Antinous is going to be speaking about. And the situation is Telemachus has just asked the suitors to leave, and Antinous is going to be arguing why they're not going to. Okay, here's one way that the context and the quotation can fit together. So you can see we've color-coded the different elements so you can see them. We're starting off with the speaker. Antinous explains Penelope's scheme to Telemachus at the assembly after the princes asked the suitor to stop plaguing his household. And this is the part that's really important. This whole lesson is about how to bring the quotation into a sentence with your own words. That's what we mean by incorporation. Quotations can no longer stand alone as a sentence. So this is part of this other sentence with the context. And then the quotation comes in with the citation. Okay? There are multiple ways to style the sentence with the context. Let's look at another one. Okay? This one puts the 4 elements of context into a different order. After Telemachus has asked the suitors to stop plaguing his household, notice the subordinate clause, Antinous responds by explaining Penelope's scheme to the prince. And Telemachus is the prince, I don't need to repeat his name. This one also uses a colon. And later, when we get to part 2 and part 3, we're going to be talking about all the different ways to incorporate. Right now we're just using a colon, which means the quotation is an example of what I just said. This is the scheme. Okay. Notice from a style point of view, the fact that this is in a subordinate clause makes this the emphasis for the sentence. Antinous is responding, not the situation. So you want to think about which part of the context is the most important for whatever it is you're going to argue about the passage. Here's yet another way to incorporate with context. Addressing Telemachus directly, Antinous claims that during the day Penelope would, and notice there's no punctuation here. The quotation flows directly into the sentence as if we'd written it. So we're leaving out a few of the words at the beginning. Stylistically, this is a better way to go. If you can make the quotation flow directly into your sentence, you can leave words out. If you leave words out at the beginning or at the end, you don't need to use the ellipse. Remember that ellipse is 3 periods, they're spaced if you're typing it up, that indicate I've left some words out. So you can leave them out in the middle and you use the ellipse, but we don't need to do it at the beginning or at the end because it's already assumed I'm taking an excerpt. Okay, and so it flows directly right into it, and then it continues afterwards as he explains Penelope's scheme after Telemachus demands that the suitors leave. All right, so this quotation right here is incorporated into an original sentence that includes the elements of context. Most of this video focuses on the first element, the content and passage. One sentence to set up and include the quoted material. Again, to emphasize, the quotation can't stand alone as a sentence. It has to be hooked up. And just as a quick note, you can hook it up in a number of different ways. You can have your own words and then the quotation, and of course the citation, and maybe a period. You can have the quotation at the first half of the sentence with the citation, and then depending on what punctuation you need, you don't always need a comma here, but you may have words of your own there. Or you can do as in the last example, you have your own words, you have the quotation with the citation, and then you have more of your own words. The focus here is on it can't stand alone as a sentence. It has to be incorporated. Okay? The next point that we're going to talk about is the topic sentence. It's one sentence that lays out the argument you intend to make. So if we were writing a whole paragraph analysis and that was all we were doing and we're not bringing it into an essay, we'd have the context and passage and that sentence that explains what you're going to argue with the passage. And for right now, we're calling that a topic sentence. Later, it may just be the first sentence of the analysis. Example, you have 2 quotations, 2 pieces of evidence in a paragraph. So both of them are helping to develop a main idea, and you'd have a topic sentence at the top. Right now, we're writing only about one passage, and we're answering a quiz question, for example, or we're doing a blog entry. Okay. Later, we're going to talk about body development, and think about our quizzes where we've had a topic sentence and then another 2 or 3 sentences that elaborate on that main idea. We're not going to really focus on that in this first night. Okay, so that topic sentence, it either answers the question, if I've posed one to you on a quiz or in an essay or of some kind, or passage analysis, and offers your insight or your interpretation on the significance of the passage. Remember, we're always writing about these passages for some reason. There's some bigger purpose. What's the author doing by writing this passage, and why do we think it's so important? Okay, so this is a little metaphor here. I don't know if you've ever seen these triptychs. You can go to AAA and they'll give you a map that goes from your destination, from where you're starting from to your destination. Now we use Google Maps for this, but this used to be, you can flip the pages and you'd see maybe the whole map of California if you were going up north. That's what a topic sentence does. It tells you where you're going, what it is that you're going to prove or argue in whatever it is you're writing. It could be small. Thesis is going to cover a whole essay. Again, topic sentence just covers one paragraph. So here's a topic sentence that would go with the passage I've incorporated earlier in this video. By emphasizing Penelope's deceit, that's what Antinous is doing with that quotation. Antinous justifies the suitor's outrageous behavior. That's interpretation. It doesn't say that in the book, but that's what I'm analyzing his speech to do. Characterizing him as manipulative and vindictive. So you can see how this really sets up a whole argument. I could write a whole paragraph. I could probably even write a whole essay on the way in which this passage is being used to characterize Antinous. to justify his behavior. And then I could go a step further if I were writing a longer piece and tie that to one of Homer's themes. Okay? But clearly this is argumentative. It sets up multiple things I could discuss. So if I were doing a short answer, I would talk about how it shows he's manipulative in justifying the behavior, and he's vindictive. Because if you continue on with the passage, you'll see that he's very angry. He's embarrassed about being deceived by a woman, and now he wants revenge. And even though he's clearly acknowledging that his behavior is wrong, he's saying, we're not going to leave until this happens. And so there's some vindictiveness in his character there. So that would kind of be the next sentence. Later we'll talk about stylistic variety, in which some of the topic sentence here may mix with your context. But for right now, in the blogs that you're doing, you're going to set up the context for the quotation, and then you're going to include the topic sentence. So your homework for tonight, after watching this video, is to, in an MLA document that you're going to submit to Turnitin, choose 2 passages that you think are significant in Book 2 for some reason, either because they develop character or they're revealing a cultural value. It's the use of juxtaposition to develop a theme. And make sure that when you choose those 2 passages that they have different purposes in the book. Don't do 2 of characterization, for example. Okay? And then what you're going to do is 2 sentences for each. 1 sentence that sets up the context and then provides the next sentence, the topic sentence that explains your reasons. Move on to the second passage. We're not going to develop the body right now. So complete assignment is 4 sentences. Make sure, though, that you follow all of the conventions. You're using the variegules to separate out the lines. Your citation is in the right format, and that your topic sentence offers some kind of interpretation.